So, we've been offering a series of teachings, as many of you know, on the Brahma Viharas, the heart qualities, also called the divine abodes from the Buddhist teachings. And there's more information on the website about them, and I think is there a handout on the table back there? I didn't check, but anyway, I think there is, if anyone wants that. So, you've heard talks and done practices on loving kindness, or metta in the Pali language. I love these words, how they sound, and compassion, karuna. And Susan's talk 2 weeks ago on sympathetic joy, mudita. And tonight we're going to be working a little further in that area with some practices with sympathetic or empathetic or appreciative joy. And then the last Brahma Vihara, starting in 2 weeks, will be upekkha. I think that's how you pronounce it. But wanted to touch in before we start. Susan had asked that we watch this video, and I don't know if it's called Human. It's one of 3 videos that she suggested we watch the first one over the last week, and I didn't know if anybody had time to do that, and what she asked was for us to notice our responses to any of the speakers in that video in terms of the Brahma Viharas, or the heart qualities. So I just thought I'd throw that out and see if anyone has anything they wanted to say about this beautiful video. And if you haven't watched it, maybe you'll get to. Any comments that anyone wants to make? Yes.
It does just kind of open your heart as soon as you start to watch it. For one, the photography is really beautiful, and just it at first it's a very passive experience, and that the imagery is beautiful. But then as the people start to talk, I found it that it was just this. It was a really amazing feeling, because it's like if you think about something to open your heart, it's different from listening to someone's story or tell a story, and how it opens your heart.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah. Thank you.
I didn't watch all of it because I thought an hour and a half. Well, when am I going to have an hour and a half? But I finally watched about a half an hour. It was fantastic. I mean, I could cry just thinking about it. As you said, the photography just drew you in. It was fabulous, and it's photography from all over the world, deserts and a wide variety. But the people who spoke of their situations, it was so moving. I mean, look, I'm thinking about it, just getting tears. This one man had been in prison, and then there are people in all these different countries, women where you have to cover, and there's oppression, and personal stories. Those people were so authentic. Just the only word I can think of it was so moving, and just made me feel such compassion for the human condition everywhere.
That's a beautiful statement too, both. Anyone else? So that was a good advertisement. I found that I also had similar, I don't think I could say it quite as eloquently, but I know one of the things that struck me was when I watched it in 2 parts as well. And when I first watched it, I was interested in the difference in my heart. I don't remember what the circumstances were when I first watched it, but I had a hard time relating because the people were different cultures. So I didn't feel the connection. And when I went back to it later, I backed it up some, and I watched, I guess it's an hour and 23 minutes or something, the first one, and I watched, I guess, an hour of it. And the more I watched, the more connected I felt with the people. It was like their cultures just disappeared. But it was different from the first time, and I don't know if it was because I was. But anyway, just as sort of a heads up if that happens or something. But it's very beautiful. Thank you, Susan, and heart opening, which we just heard from you guys. So I look forward to the other two. So I thought that was a good sort of lead into some things I wanted to say, which before we do the practices, which that one thing that you might be noticing from the video and from what we're learning about the Brahma Viharas is that they're not really freestanding. Once you start working with one of them, the other three are usually right there. They're right in there. They're like, don't leave me out. Christina Feldman says, mindfulness, friendliness, compassion, and joy are like different but interwoven melodies that make up a single song. So, that comes through in that human video, I think. But an example of that might be, so you have somebody in your life that you're experiencing some difficulty with extending loving kindness or compassion to for some reason. And, because you're on the path, you're thinking, how am I going to work with that? So you might start, by remembering the First Noble Truth, like you, everyone is suffering. And then you might try to think about what that person's life might be like, as best you can guess, and what their suffering might be. And so you're trying to figure out how can I open my heart to this person. And then you might remember that just like you, this person wants to be happy. And then here's empathy coming in. And then, of course, the compassion may arise then, and the heart quivers in its natural response. And then you might notice it's more possible. There's a space for loving kindness and compassion, and as the heart is relaxing and opening, you might notice sympathetic joy is arising, and we're likely at that point to be resting in equanimity, not wanting to change that person or make things different. So something to think about is that focusing on any one of these Brahma Viharas can be a Dharma door and is an opening to happiness, peace, and freedom. So whichever way you go at it, the others are going to be right there. And Susan and I have talked in some depth about appreciative joy, sympathetic joy, and as I've been looking more deeply into it for tonight, I'm struck by how unsimple it is. It's just, even though in many ways it's a very simple and natural response. Sometimes it's really easy. You see a baby's face that's joyful and you're right there. Or your pet, my dog wagging her tail at the treat or the door or whatever. And, the joy is easy. But sometimes it's not. And this can be complicated by any number of causes and conditions, from how much energy we have right now to some trauma that happened years ago. Susan touched on this in her talk, how we can very spontaneously feel sympathetic joy in a particular situation, followed almost in that same situation, almost immediately, by surprise at some ache in our heart or a snarky thought about something. And that can be kind of confusing. Or we can intentionally be inclining our hearts towards celebrating other people's joy, only to be dismayed by some feeling of stinginess that comes up. I never feel that, but But anyway, you know, I wanted that, or why them? Why them and not me? You know, come on. So that comparison thing that Susan talked about, those far enemies of envy and jealousy and resentment that can kind of feel like they shut down our experience of appreciative joy. And, of course, that can lead to more suffering, which we in the world certainly don't need. I like this quote from Groucho Marx: "I've had a perfectly wonderful evening, but this wasn't it." So, anyway. So what about the situations that we're going to be working on these a little bit about that many of us are facing right now across our aisles with the people close up in our lives, our friends, our relatives, who may have feelings and beliefs that are different from ours. I certainly have some, and I'm sure you do. A friend told me recently of her cousin who collects guns and is passionate about protecting his right to do this and to carry a gun all the time for his safety. And my friend has a real strong aversion to that, and because she's a staunch supporter of gun control and against this. And I mean, you know, it's those feelings aren't fun when we care about somebody and we don't, you know, we don't think like they do, and we feel that kind of deep aversion. But they're real, and we need to be aware of them, and they need our care and attention and self-compassion, loving kindness, just like the other feelings do. So that we can somehow find a way to be with all of that, the sympathetic joy, the appreciative joy, and our messy snarkiness. It's challenging. It's challenging for me. And I just wanted to, this seems related to me, a very good friend of mine, Judy, who was a hospice volunteer. She was a wonderful, creative, generous person. She developed a very rapid cancer and died within 3 weeks a few years ago. And when friends were visiting her before she died, they commented, you know, why did this happen to you of all people? And she answered, she said she thought really deeply about it in that short period of time. And the answer was, why not me? So, you know, that question of can we have this kind of generosity and grace about the things that happen? Can we live and die with these things right now in the messiness of our real daily lives? Can my friend listen to her cousin's passion for collecting guns, including automatic rifles, to his really detailed knowledge about the history of his guns, how they work? You know, he's really into it. Can she listen to what is beautiful to him about the guns? Can she watch his face as it lights up when he talks about the pleasure he takes in his hobby? Is it possible for her to find a way to have appreciative joy in this situation? And she told me he has a lot of guns. He has a whole big room over the garage that's filled with them. So can she have this kind of genuine, connected, appreciative joy, not that excessive Pollyanna kind, but not hypocritical, but real? I don't know, like, what Judy's thoughts and feelings were that led her to respond to her dying in the way she did, but I'm pretty sure that in her own Christian tradition, she was grounded in something like the Brahma Viharas, which is what we've been working on. And then the other thing that I just wanted to say is that I wanted to emphasize from Susan's talk, that it's really important to keep really close in our mind our initial response of joy and appreciation when we have it, rather than, let them really sink in, rather than focusing too excessively on the more painful responses, although we certainly want to notice and care about them. We want to really honor that joy that's so natural. Jack Kornfield says, joy is natural to an open heart. In it, we are not afraid of pleasure. we do not mistakenly believe it's disloyal to the suffering of the world to honor the happiness we have been given. You know, and Rick Hansen, of course, teaches us that we want to hardwire joy. I do have to add this little story because my husband and I were talking about it on the way over. I was visiting a friend this past week who has a 9-month-old who's pulling up. And I mean, she's on the go already. It's like, oh my gosh. And so she's falling a lot and bonking her head. And she did it while I was there. And her mom picked her up and started singing my favorite things to her. And I said, oh, you're teaching Nico mindfulness. Think about it, the song, you know. When the dog bites, when the bee stings, when you're feeling sad, you simply remember your favorite things and then you don't feel so bad. So, you know, Nico is learning. She's having her happiness hardwired when she's from the get-go. Lucky little girl. It was beautiful to watch. And finally, the Dalai Lama says there are 6 billion people in the world and 6 billion chances for happiness. 6 billion. There are probably 7 billion now since this came around. Chances for happiness. So, that's what we're doing tonight. So we're going to do the smaller group things. So if you can kind of put yourselves in groups of 5 or 6 people, and just with however you want to do that with your chairs. So listen up for 1 second. Hopefully these are similar to situations in your real life. And you can pick one, or if you have time for both. And I put some questions for consideration, but look at these in terms of how appreciative joy might arise or not. And it's likely that you may feel some stuckness when you look into them. And just see if there are any words to put to that. And remember, there are no right or wrong answers. This is not a test. So let's take about 10 minutes, and I'll ring the bell. Or maybe another 8 3/4 anyway. Okay. Okay, so when you finish that last sentence, I invite you to sort of come back as a group. You don't necessarily have to move, but so here's an opportunity to share anything that anyone is wanting to share about. I don't even know what question I want to ask exactly, but how this is, how taking this practice into a situation that the complexities maybe show up. How does that work for you, and how does that work for your intentions to have appreciative joy for the people in your lives? Or something like that. You can say something else that's not related to that. So. Thanks, Kristen.
For me, if I practice it when someone tells me good news and I feel that kind of feeling of envy welling up, if I sort of soften my face and kind of act as if that I'm really happy for them, and kind of not fake it till you make it a little bit, and just always, it's sort of, it makes it easier just to overall physically soften my heart, soften my expression, feel generous, things like that, in order to feel the sympathetic joy.
That's beautiful. Could you all hear her? Okay, yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Susan.
Something that Penny said, which really helped me to soften around this, was that when I'm because we did the second one, when I'm facing somebody where I don't feel, I'm so opposed, and that puts up a wall. And what she was saying is, part of what has been difficult since the election, I mean, she didn't say that, but I'm saying that, is just the polarization and how people sort of go underground with their feelings. So what I, in this little time, feel is maybe it's an opening of hope that in feeling and cultivating sympathetic joy, that joy is seen by my uncle who has opposing views, and that together that may cultivate some opening, that we, I'm not attached to change happening, but, that there is the potential there, that I'm seeing his humanity in this moment by cultivating this sense of joy that he feels and sharing that, and that is wholesome.
Yeah.
And that emphasizes, it's bridging a separation just in that moment, whether we have any political, coming to terms with one another, but that it bridges separation there. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you, Susan. What really popped out for me there was in that moment.
Helen, what came up for me was that I can't go there if I don't lead with compassion. If I can't cultivate some sense of compassion for the person with whom I disagree, or then it's very hard for me to generate the sympathetic joy. It really goes to your point about how they're all sort of interwoven. Mm-hmm. But it just feels to me like I have to lead with that.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you, Jeff.
We focused on the second scenario, and I would just like to follow what Jeff said. I think I in this moment was not able to imagine mustering sympathetic joy for the uncle, because the compassion part still called forth for me the person not speaking, who are the people being harmed by the statue. So wasn't like a personal thing so much as, to me, the statue represents harm that's current, not just past, but that's actually existing right now.
Right.
And so I found it difficult to feel celebratory even in a moment when somebody else was celebrating. And yet I felt like maybe the place for me for growth would be that understanding more, being curious, being mindfully interested, not pushing away, not hating, just opening. So that was about as far as I could imagine going in that scenario. So.
Okay. Thank you, Julie. I'm just realizing we're almost out of time, but what I was hearing sort of generally is there even a tiny space for connection, in the moment, and and with that intention, where does that lead? I heard a lot more than that, and I'm sure it was hope. I would like to have been in each group. Thank you all so much for sharing and showing up in these practices, and I get a lot from it. I wanted to just, if y'all give me like 2 3/4 minutes. Okay, is that okay? Just to finish up, in closing, I recently listened to an interview with James Baraz and Ruth King. He, I guess, is doing a series on how to deal with stuff that's going on that we've all been talking about. And she talks about, and I think I've heard her say this before other places, but that we begin to have a sort of a background or an elevator music of the intention to be kind-hearted and forgiving of ourselves and other people. And she says that, our rage is rooted in how we survive, but not in how we heal, which is, I think, what we're working on. And she speaks of increasing the ability to more quickly notice what she calls armoring up, and of trying to remember that background music in that moment. And even we can do that after the fact as well. So 2 things, can we notice more quickly and bring that background music of intention to be kind-hearted and to bear on the situation. And the second thing, taking the opportunity to think about a situation and see if we can figure exactly when we armored up and what happened. And I think all of that is encompassed in cultivating sympathetic joy. And then I know all of you have had the experience of happiness for no reason. You're just hanging out, and there it is. And I just wanted to share this little teeny poem by Muriel Rukeyser called "A Little Stone in the Middle of the Road in Florida. My son as a child saying, God is anything, even a little stone in the middle of the road in Florida. Yesterday, Nancy, my friend after a long illness, you know what can lift me up, take me right out of despair? No, what? Anything. Anything. So, give yourself some gratitude for your practice and the generosity of your practice. Namaste. Thank you.